Every time I research one of these, I feel that I can't be shocked, and then it just turns around and just shocks the shit out of me in a crazy, crazy way. And this is probably the most horrible story I've ever heard or researched. It is the story of the death of Oncwanique Tribblet. When I began researching this, I looked for pictures of Onquinique just to kind of get a feel of, what she looked like. She was a baby girl. I couldn't find any, really, of her. Ironically and sadly, at the same time, the only one I was able to find was one of her crying. Poor baby didn't really live a really long life, and it seemed like her life that she did live was pretty terrible. She was only 15 months when she was murdered at the hands of her parents. It was mostly, according to the court documents, her father, or her stepfather, Everett Johnson. He was 29 years old at the time. Her mother, Joan Tribet, who was 27 at the time. Onquinique was crying one morning on December 19th. She woke up at 4 a.m, upset, crying, and it enraged the father figure of the house, Everett Johnson. Everett Johnson, who was upset with Onquinique's crying, decided to stop her crying by beating her with a wooden object, whether it be a ruler or a spoon. He beat her, which of course caused her to cry more. She was a baby, it hurt, so he continued to beat her. After she didn't stop crying, he then choked her, strangled her to death. In that time, while he was beating her, her mother came in, Miss Tribet, and assisted in the strangulation of Onquinique. Onquinique died at the scene, and the parents panicked, didn't know what to do, didn't want to call the ambulance, so they literally did the most horrible thing. They dismembered poor Onquinique, cutting her up into pieces. They then decided that they were going to go and boil those pieces to get rid of the body. So they cooked her. After they got done cooking Onquinique, they then fed her pieces of her poor little 15-month-old body to stray dogs in the alley next to their home. What they couldn't feed to the dogs, or what they couldn't finish boiling, those remains were put in a vat of battery acid to dissolve so no one would be able to locate those remains. Everett and Joan, her parents, were charged with first-degree murder and concealing a homicide after a maternal grandmother filed a missing persons report. When she couldn't see her grandchild, she couldn't get an excusable answer as to why she wasn't able to see her. For 6 months, her grandmother had tried to see the baby, listened to all of these crazy excuses for why she wasn't able to see her, and finally she just got fed up and called the police. The grandmother told the police that the common story was that the child was with another family member, but it kind of began to seem suspicious, and she no longer believed them. Everett and Joan confessed to the police exactly what they had done, and when they were brought into questioning, sadly, there were 3 other children in the home, and they were removed and placed in care. In June 1998, Everett and Joan were denied bond. It was revealed that Onquinique wouldn't stop crying and that she was beaten and strangled until she died. Judge William Wise said that what had happened to this little angel was despicable, and he ordered the couple to be held without bond. The 3 remaining children, a 9-month-old girl, a 3-year-old boy, and a 6-year-old girl, were eventually placed with their aunt. During the hearing, Joan sat looking uncomfortable, and she kept her head low and eyes closed while Everett remained without expression. Detectives did a search of the house and they didn't find nothing that remained of Onquinique. This meant that there was nothing left of the child to bury. Onquinique wouldn't have a grave, no headstone, nothing to show that she ever existed. In August of 2002, the trial began for justice for Onquinique. Everett at that time was 33 years old, and Joan was 31. Everett was charged with killing Onquinique, cutting up her body, and making every attempt to rid her remains. Joan was charged with murder, but shockingly, she was able to strike a deal that allowed her to have a reduced sentence if she testified against Everett. Joan's sister testified in court that one of the siblings had told her that the baby had been given away. Freddie Tribet, the grandmother, said that she called the police to report the child missing in June of 1998 because Joan had refused to allow her to see the baby and wouldn't bring her to Freddie's house even though Joan had 3 siblings that had visited many times. The assistant state attorney, Frank Merrick, stated that the parents were upset because the baby wouldn't sleep through the night. After being afraid of the legal trouble they could be in when Onquinique was struggling to breathe, they simply walked away and left her to die. Everett and Joan were then afraid to lose the 3 remaining children, and they did what they did in a horrible, horrible fashion. Frank Merrick said in court that the 2 waited to remove the children from the house so they can put Onquinique's body in the tub. A sharp knife was used to dismember her body into pieces, and they were handed to Joan, who began to cook them. The couple soon realized that the smoke and the smell were too much, and they needed a different way to dispose of the little baby's remains. On his way to work, Everett said that he had thrown the baby's spine out of the window and into the woods. He brought battery acid after work in a pot. While the cooked parts of his baby were fed to stray dogs, what remained was placed into the pot and in the battery acid. Pieces of the child's bones didn't dissolve in the acid. They were scattered outside in the rain, while softer pieces would have been saved, and another way to dispose of them would have been found. A blender was borrowed from a neighbor. Everett had taken the police on a 4-hour search for remains where he said that he had butchered her body. At another time, Everett told police that he had left the body in a vat of acid at a public housing complex. Everett eventually broke down and told the truth, and none of the remains of this precious innocent angel were ever recovered. In September of 2002, Everett Johnson was convicted of killing Onquinique. Judge John William Schultz said that the actions of both parents showed combined malignancies with their hearts. Judge Lon Schultz said that the way that this baby died and was hidden away for over 6 months was heinous, but the manner in which she had died, being choked and beaten with a ruler by the people who were supposed to be her parents, was not extreme enough for either of them to receive the death penalty, which is absolutely insane. I'm left wondering, what is extreme enough? Because this is probably the most extreme thing that I have ever heard of. Prosecutors Frank Merrick and Veryl Gambino said that Everett could get up to 100 years in prison for what he did to this child and face 5 years for hiding the murder. Each prosecutor agreed that this had been the worst case of someone concealing a murder that they had ever seen. Of course, Everett's lawyer said that Joan was the one who had killed the baby. Joan had been sentenced to 60 years in prison on August 30th after she had testified against Everett. Joan claimed that the death of the child had been an accident. Apparently, she claimed that she and Everett were sleeping when they woke up around 4 a.m. because the baby was crying. Joan claims that Everett held the child's face into the bed and began beating her with a ruler until she went limp. Defense lawyer Brian Dosch said that Everett and Joan had diminished the credibility of their statements, with each of the couple began to accuse the other of being the one to kill Onquinique. As of today's date, I'm unable to find out what sentence Everett received for what he did to his angel.